Right. So I thought I'd just sort of set the scene on this and then we just discuss and see where we get to. So obviously migration is often needed for host maintenance, things like that. Needed with a few of us. When you migrate VMs, we sometimes see problems. There's two main classes of issue we see. One is guest kernel crashes. That's relatively rare. If that happens, it's normally detectable by the tool stack. The admin therefore knows it's happened. And distros are generally pretty good at taking patches or fixes for that sort of stuff.
The more common one we see is guest user space issues. So typically around networking, you get issues where things like IP tables rules get removed as part of the migration and then nothing puts them back, which breaks all kinds of things. So Kubernetes, for example, depending on exactly what networking method you're using, it can just blow up completely on the migration. There's some other things around like clustered services, but often that might not be just because the guest is aware of the migration. That might actually be a result of the downtime, so there's not much you can do about that. But the problem with both of those is they're generally impossible for the tool stack to detect, so the admin's entirely unaware. They think the migration's happy, the VM's running in the new place, until their users or monitoring system goes, it's all gone wrong. Two possible classes of solution here. So one is do the migration in a way that the guest is unaware of it. And there is actually sitting in the in zen.git a design doc on this from Amazon originally in terms of how to do it in a way that the guest doesn't know it's happened. I guess the other class would be modifying things like netfront so we don't generate these sort of link down events across a migration. So the user space isn't aware of it, even if the kernel is. And yeah, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on these or has looked at any of this stuff, but it's probably one of the biggest issues we see that means customers don't like migrating VMs, particularly Linux VMs, and are always therefore worried about applying updates and stuff.
So if no one wants to jump in, I will jump in. So I've worked on a, not migration, but a subset of that, which is the VM forking system. And there I've encountered many sub-issues that would actually prevent even just forking a virtual machine, not even considering the tool stack itself. So on x86, for example, there was no way that the non-register state for Intel CPUs would actually get copied as part of regular VM saving. So in case the guest was executing a particular set of instructions and you would try to resume that VM in a fork, you would actually have a VM enter failure. So I actually proposed that to be saved as part of the VM state, but that never actually got merged into the tool stack side. So some of the HVM function callbacks for saving non-register state actually exist now for VM forking, but it's not exposed to guests. So if you want to do guest unaware migration, then you actually have to save that state, because otherwise you will have these freak incidents where you resume the VM and it will actually have a VM enter failure. The other thing for toolstack, I actually got toolstack working for forking, which is effectively a guest unaware migration, except it's inside the same machine. And for Windows, it actually worked fine for just starting a new QEMU process, dumping the QEMU state from the parent VM and then loading up the QEMU state in the fork. For Windows, that pretty much worked every time, but it didn't work for Linux. And for Linux, there was something that actually needed to be done when the Linux VM is getting saved. So if I would save a Linux VM, restore it, and then fork, and do the same QEMU state dump and reload for the fork, it would work, but not if I didn't do the save before. So there's definitely some dependency on the guest being aware that it is being saved and hence being migrated. So I never actually figured out what the root cause of that was and why Windows worked and why Linux worked. I never had any issues with Windows, just doing the QEMU state dump and load. But yeah, for Linux, it was definitely an issue. So there is definitely some, there be dragons. I was hoping Andy will join because he's definitely the more knowledgeable on that side, but that's as far as I got with guest unaware migration work.
I can't see anything that Linux will do something different. We at Amazon, as you said earlier on, we posted something, but we're using guest transparent live migrations. I think we had to call it non-cooperative live migrations on the main list. But yeah, we have something working on it. Can't remember something so weird like that with Linux. So most of our guests doesn't know, well, all of our guests don't know how that's still live migrated in general. The code itself is not complicated. There's pieces in Zen to do it, like event channel to transfer a ground table. QEMU, I don't think we added much on Zen. It's mostly the PV states for netback and blockback. If you want to do with PCI pass-through, you will need to transfer the states of the PCI device also across.
One thing about, I think, PV networking, I think Andy mentioned something a while ago that there's something built into the PV protocol that it loses some state on purpose that you have to recreate when you reattach. Like if you have in-flight packets, I think you're dropping them and you have to, I don't know the exact details. There was something weird there on how the networking worked in terms of even what happens during normal migration, during aware migration.
Dropping a few packets during migration isn't a big deal, really. It's obviously, unless you're using something like TCP, it'll retransmit them and deal with it anyway. You don't want to do it too often, obviously. You don't want to drop too many things, but a few packets isn't a big deal. The Amazon doc, I had a read of it the other day. I guess the big challenge for some scenarios is going to be that the DOM ID has to remain consistent for the VM in the source and destination, because it's encoded in XenStore and various bits of protocol and what have you. So the suggestion in the proposal is to use a randomized DOM ID. Obviously, I guess in the Amazon case, you've got the benefit of if that DOM ID is on use and the host you're trying to move to, you just move it somewhere else, whereas in some of the sort of more server cases or whatever, admin says put it on that machine. You want to put it on that machine. But I guess that might mean you know, tool stacks might need some sort of, if it's a pool of servers that are being managed as one, centrally allocate DOM IDs or something like that. Don't know if anyone's thought about that on tool stack side.
I would say it depends on whether you have more than, I can't remember the maximum, is it 16,000 DOM ID you have? So if you have
15 bits, isn't it? So
Yeah, it's 16 or 15 bits. There's some reserved bits, I think, on the upper end. So,
it's 15 bits.
so it could be 15, yeah.
Okay, so if you have more than that number of VM, I can't do the math, so it's too late, getting late in the day.
32,000.
Yeah, 32,000, fair enough, thank you. If you have more than 32,000 VM in your pools, then you will need to find something different, because you have different domain with the same DOM ID.
For the use cases that Sense Server typically doubles in, which is all DOM use are meant to be segregated from each other and have non-interference and whatnot, it occurs to me, why not tell each guest, you are DOM1. And then internally we have a real DOM ID, but that can change across different hosts.
I guess that needs some sort of layer to fake it somewhere, some sort of shim layer somewhere that's translating.
You need to translate it for the backend.
Well, there is no special translation, I guess, because you cannot trust the guest to tell the truth to begin with.
The grants in the backends in DOM0 are looking at XenStore, and if the VM's writing itself in as one,
So I think what you will need to have in XenStore, the domain should only be able to write in local domain its DOM ID. So if you manage to translate in XenStore the DOM ID to whatever you want for DOM0, then it should do the job, assuming that you don't have to share with other domain. On same in Zen, when the domain is entering, rather than using the DOM ID that it has, you will have to force the DOM ID. But you have the current vCPU, you know which domain it is.
So to me, both the DOM ID one and the randomized one just sound like hacks around the problem. I think having the domain using a UUID would be the proper solution, so that you have no chance or very low chance of collisions. and then the VM would be able to identify itself by its own UUID, and that would be used in XenStore instead of a integer domain ID. So.
The problem of the UID in particular for hypercall is that it's going to be a large string or large value, so you have to transfer it, which has more impact. Whether the impact will be seen, I don't know, but that's the disadvantage. But otherwise, if you have like a 64 bits, I think today's DOM ID is 16 or 16 bits in the structure.
128 bits, right? 16.
I think it's 16 as a
16 bytes.
yeah.
16 bytes, I think.
Yeah. So we will have to see whether it's possible to increase the structure for that.
But you could do the UUID just in XenStore. You're dealing with strings there anyway. So in XenStore, you could refer to the UUID. And then in all the hypercalls, you refer to it by DOM ID. That's fine, because you refer to it by, it doesn't matter whether that one changes that much. But the XenStore one needs to stay fixed, so the backend can find the front end.
The only problem with that is I'm pretty sure that most of the domain will realize that the DOM ID is a uint on probably 16 bits. So anything you do, if you want backward compatibility, that won't work.
Also, the VM needs to know its DOM ID in certain hypercalls. The VM's going to need to, if it's doing a grant or something to another VM, it's going to need to know its DOM ID at that point, isn't it? So if you yeah, but okay, but it's got to give that to another VM through XenStore or whatever if it's doing it. So it's got to, even if it sticks its UID in there, somehow it's got to give it the other DOM ID give its DOM ID to the other end at some point.
Yeah,
or
if you're using stub domains, then yeah, that could be a problem.
It wouldn't be a problem for XenServer because we don't do anything other than to DOM0, but for other scenarios it could be.
I think the DOM ID problem can be separated from the live migrations. Is then up to each vendor to decide what they expect there. So randomizing, yes, is not nice, but it works at the moment. If they want to go further, then it can be on top. I will not put that as a mandatory thing for the live migrations.
Yeah, and like you said about the central assignment, that would probably work inside the pool for XenServer. Normally we can say we support at most 32,000 VMs, and that's it. It's going to be a problem for migrating between pools. But even intra-pool migration, being guest unaware, would already be a huge improvement to most customers, right? And then we can find another solution for the other one when we have it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can solve every problem because, for example, if you wanted to do, and there are genuine use cases for this, a local host migrate, you've got to give it a new DOM ID at that point because you can't migrate into the same DOM ID you're running in. So there's going to be scenarios where whatever method you use isn't probably going to work all the time. So yeah, being able to do it in some scenarios is better than being able to do it in none.
It's not, if you, within a pool, you technically don't need a unique DOM ID, so long you have just enough domains and you can transfer them anywhere. So like say you have 10 server and you only have like 5 domain with a 5 DOM ID. Yes, it's not same DOM ID. Yes, it's not good, but you might be able to migrate things around enough to make things working.
If the tool stack is choosing where to send it, yes, if the admin has explicitly said send the VM here.
Yeah. Indeed, it doesn't solve everything.
Yeah, it would probably work in a cloud scenario. It wouldn't work in an end user scenario.
In some scenarios, yeah. I guess, is it worth talking a little bit about the other possible approach around making it so that, yeah, the kernel might still be aware, but user space doesn't have the problems that we see? So for anyone who came in a bit later, the primary issue we see is around networking side of things. So as I understand it, when you do a migrate, NetFront essentially is generating a link down event that triggers various cleanups and things. Typically things like IP tables rules can get removed from the interface because the interface effectively disappears. And then when it comes back up, nothing re-injects those rules and that blows up certain things like Kubernetes networking. So I don't know whether there's anyone knows enough about NetFront to know if there's any scope for adjusting that.
Well, we can just not do that, and simply we detach at one end, we reattach at the other, but don't tell the kernel. And as long as the PV back is either keeping track of what it didn't send and migrating that, or replaying at the other end, things will be fine.
If you start replaying that, you would be better off to go up to a full aware, non-aware guest migrations.
Yeah, because if you're changing the DOM ID, that you've got to replug it. The protocol requires it, doesn't it?
Well, if it's unaware, you cannot change anything at all.
Yes, but if you start to say the network card is staying in place to Linux, Linux will have somehow to restart some of it.
Sure, but the guest might not be in a position to replug, or maybe it's a BSD kernel, or maybe.
I think the issue at the moment, I think, is, as I understand it, the code is written around, it's the same code path for a suspend as it is a migrate. So it's, in the suspend scenario, you do want to say the interface is going away because by the point it comes back, it's long times past. But in a migrate, you kind of just want to say, hey, disconnect your PV bits, but it's coming back. Keep everything going in the rest of the kernel.
Well, for all intents and purposes, it really is a blip in the network. I think, oops, sorry, packets were dropped in this case. But dropping packets in netback is okay. Dropping IOs in blockback is not.
But this is purely, I mean, we don't tend to see issues with the block side of things.
But there's also a difference between not having a link, right, like unplugging a cable, and having the whole interface go away. And I think the problem might also be that in some cases the whole interface goes away. So even in suspend case, you might want to keep the interface around, even if you say you had a link down and link up event, because then at least you would retain things like the IP tables rules. Because just because your network cable gets unplugged, you don't go and delete your IP tables rules, right? But if your whole interface goes away, that's the problem when you lose state that you might want to avoid. Well, I'm not sure if you can do a completely unaware migration, because there's one thing we do in the agent that when you finish migration, we send out, I think, an unsolicited ARP so that the switches update the place where the VM is running now. So what would you do when you do unaware migration? Who would send out the packets to update the place? Obviously, you're running in a different place now.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably fake that from DOM0 because all you need to do is send a packet with the VM's MAC address. That's all you're trying to do is get the layer 2 network to understand, hey, it's over here now. So you could probably fake that in that sense. Or you still prod the guest agent to say, send it, but everything else is fine because the guest agent, ultimately, we control the code of. So if it's, well, the admin controls code of. The issue here generally is that the admin runs some VMs, and what the VMs do, the admin doesn't necessarily know about, or the admin of the Zen environment doesn't necessarily know about, and so can't control what they're doing. But yeah, that's certainly worth thinking about. The gratuitous ARP needs to be preserved.
As for using in-guest agents for any type of migration, my preference would be very much to be able to do this type of migration without any guest, because for some of the use cases, it's imperative to not have anything that's identifiable inside a virtual machine, such as malware analysis, where it would be awesome if we could like do this type of forking with the networking and graphics and everything still working, but we can't have anything in the VM that's easily fingerprintable. So the guest agent is just not an option for that case, but we still need.
That necessarily in that scenario.
Yep.
Yes, something. Just a remark, something remotely related. The NetBSD guests have issues precisely with live migration, and it's a bug related to suspend of the network interface. Just for information, it was a case with PV. And we still got the issue with PVH. If it's suspend with network also or not, I'm not sure. But for PV, for sure, it was exactly this.
got any other thoughts? Because I think that's all I had to suggest to talk about.
There is a series on PAR on a couple of years ago on the main list.
Oh, is there a series as well? Okay, I'll dig that
A
out.
list to do the a generic term context. I don't, to be honest, on top of that, I don't, from what I remember from Amazon, we don't have that many patches on top. It's not a lot to transfer. It's mostly the tool stack on the logics there, but in Zen, there is pretty much nothing to transfer more, even channel and countable.
So how did you solve at Amazon the DOM ID migration problem?
Random DOM ID.
Oh, so you randomize and hope there's no hash collision
Yeah,
at the other
once
side.
there's
Okay.
collision, so when you plan migration, you always have to plan a rollback because there might be issue on the new servers, etc. So my understanding, I haven't really looked at the codes in detail, so that's. I haven't too much looked at the code, but my understanding is that we will try to do it, and if it doesn't work, we'll try somewhere else. But because our pool are big, then the chance of a DOM ID being reused is limited in general.
So it's a control plane problem.
Yes.
Just find a compatible.
Yep.
You could even find that ahead of time, right? You could do like a pre-migration check, and if that host is not good, you find one that's good.
In the case where you have several potential hosts, that's fine.
Yeah, if you have a choice.
If you have two and you want to migrate to reboot this one,
But
might not be a problem.
it might be, yes, it might be a problem, but if you use, well, I guess it's because we're using randomness, the chance that you have two domain in a small pool with the same DOM ID is fairly limited. I know that is not a great solution, and
It's still the same problem. At that point, if you've got a small enough scenario where 32,000, you're never going to hit that, then you could just allocate them centrally.
but the problem is you have a small pool, then you want to reboot a server, you may not have enough space for that domain
Yeah.
somewhere else. So
Yeah, that's an existing problem. I'll just take the chance to say that global namespaces are evil, and I wish Zen didn't decide to make DOM IDs.
16-bit, right?
Well, not only 16-bit, 16-bit, and the guest doesn't need to know who they are.
You're a couple decades too late for
Yeah.
it.
I mean, that's exactly why I was saying, hey, let's tell that you're number one, and you're number one, and you're number one. Then all these problems disappear, even though architecturally they are meant to be unique.
have a chat with Jürgen. He had some ideas what to do there.
Okay.
We touched on that. Okay, I don't think there's anything we touched on that we didn't finish, so unless anyone's got any other comments or thoughts. Cool. I'll tidy up the notes and send them out to the mailing list anyway. But, cool.
Good then.
No, sure.
I'm not sure whether we had anyone online.
No, there was nobody.
There was nobody online. It says one participant.
I won't guarantee it completely, but I'll be able to find something which is not necessarily clean. Upstream, I can share.
Okay, I'll make a note of that.
If you want to have a look. I don't guarantee anything. I need to have a chat first.